Well, we're coming up on week 3, and that's always a good thing because we're moving through the fantasy football season real nice right now. Hopefully you're not sitting at 0-2 and panicking. I know I just made a video about that earlier today about, how this time of the year, obviously you're either one of 3 things. You're either 2-0, sitting pretty, looking really good. Maybe you're a shaky 1-1 and you're a little nervous, or you're at 0-2 and you're kind of in panic mode right now. Now, obviously, I've managed a lot of teams that started out 2-0 and ended up being fine. So I don't think you need to overreact about anything. But obviously, I'm here tonight answering fantasy football questions in advance for week 3. So make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to show your support. And before we answer any questions tonight, I wanted to go through some injuries, obviously, as I saw today. One of the biggest ones that stuck out to me is that Jordan Love practiced for the Green Bay Packers today. So that's obviously a massive thing for people who have not only Jordan Love at the quarterback position, which is a frigging mess right now, but it's also massive for Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed, it's huge for all the receivers. It's going to make Josh Jacobs better and probably push him in the end zone finally. And I think that overall, when Jordan Love does come back, this Packers offense is great. And that's why I've been saying for a while, you need to buy in on Packers players while Jordan Love is out. Because the good thing is he avoided long-term injury. And now we're looking like he might be coming back here potentially this week. So he practiced in limited fashion today. Obviously, don't make too much of it, but definitely know that as you prepare for this week. And we'll continue to update you guys on Jordan Love's status. I've got a quarterback ranking video coming out tomorrow as well, because I know the state of quarterbacks right now in fantasy, and it is brutal. I mean, it is brutal right now. So I'm going to go through the quarterback rankings tomorrow. So make sure to stay tuned for that. I also saw that, what was the other big one that I saw? Justin Herbert didn't practice for the Chargers. This one doesn't have a ton of fantasy impact. Like, obviously, Herbert's not been that great in fantasy so far this year. So I don't know how many people were planning on, rolling with Justin Herbert this week. I'm sure people who have him are already frustrated and, wanted to get an upgrade if that really was your starter. I guess it's a little bit noteworthy for someone like a Ladd McConkey or a Quentin Johnston. But I still actually think that Herbert's going to end up playing in this game because he's tough. I mean, that dude is tough. He's played through injuries basically his entire career. So I don't really have any reason to believe that he's going to miss that game. Those are some of the big ones that I've seen right now. Obviously, one of the biggest ones, I guess I'll just touch on really quick. I predicted it. I said Tua. I think my gut instinct is that they'll place him on the IR. They did exactly that. Miami Dolphins put Tua on the IR officially, so he's out at least the next 4 games. I kind of figured that would be the case. Just bad optics for the NFL. Maybe they didn't step in. Maybe it was an easy decision for Miami's medical staff. But, I mean, I definitely think that there was an influence there for them to need to put him on IR. So that's kind of some important news and notes. We'll go through, start answering some questions. We're going to start out at the top. You guys know the drill. If you guys want to get your question answered right away, the Super Chat, that's what it's there for. Super Chats get you answered immediately. But make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And check out the free Aaron Rodgers line on Underdog. Half a yard tomorrow night. It's going to be a great one to smash. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is going to get more than half a yard, barring the brutal Achilles tear like it happened last year, but don't even speak it into existence, right? That is in the description. Demetrios, what's going on, man? Thoughts on Alexander Madison or Braylon Allen? I think that Braylon Allen's the guy I prefer. Because, I mean, really, when you're talking about both of these guys, you need to acknowledge that they're both handcuffed backs. Like, if you actually watched the Jets and Titans last week, I watched that full game, and Breece Hall was, out for... He was, kind of in and out of that game, which made me think that he may have been dealing with an injury, and I think he was on the injury report. I don't think he missed any practice time, but I think he did. He formally was on the injury report heading into this week. So I think he's dealing with something minor, and Braylon Allen proved himself. The dude's legit. I mean, the dude is legit. He was really efficient on every carry that he got, and he's also got pass catching ability as well. Alexander Mattison, you take away that touchdown in week 1, he is what he is. He's just not that good of a football player. So I would say that Braylon Allen is the guy I prefer there. You can't start either of these guys. Like, there's no way I'm starting Braylon Allen this week. And definitely no way I'm starting Alexander Mattison. That's impossible for me to do that. So I would definitely not start either one of these guys. I guess if I had to pick, I would start out with Braylon Allen. But, I mean, I would imagine in most situations, people are in better shape than considering Braylon Allen. Like, at the flex spot, I think that Braylon Allen is not going to be consistently getting that kind of target share. Not the target share. The workload in the backfield, I don't think is going to be consistently there for Braylon Allen unless Breece is dealing with an injury and they want to manage him a little bit. I'll need to see that one first. So I think that if you're talking about who I prefer, I definitely prefer Braylon Allen. But I also don't think that you should be playing either one of those two. Appreciate the super chat. Dubs, what's going on? Packers or Vikings defense for week 3? Yeah, I've gotten a lot of questions on the Packers, man. I obviously put out the defense ranking video yesterday. If you haven't seen it, go back and watch it after the live stream. I got a lot of questions on the Packers and where they were at. Packers did not make the top 12 for me this week. And I can understand it from a lot of different angles here. I mean, the Titans offense, it's so funny. Like, they actually have talent this year. Like, unlike previous years past where they couldn't move the ball unless it was Derrick Henry. They actually have talent this year. Pollard looks really good. They've got Ridley who looks really good. But Will Levis is the ultimate problem there. I mean, that really is what it comes down to, is that Will Levis is the ultimate problem. Now, the reason why, like, I'll say this before I say the reason why. The Packers are a good play. Like, they're barely outside of my top 12 because they're a good play this week. Because they're taking on Will Levis. Like, that's the reason why I think that the Packers are a good play. They're going to be able to get turnovers on Levis, I think. I think that's going to be a major factor why the Packers would be a good play. Now, the reason they weren't in the top 12 is because I do think their defense is soft. I have not been shy about that. I do think it's a soft defense. So I just prefer, the Vikings defense on the whole. Like, season long, I think they're just a better, more physical, well-coached defense that is good to hold opponents to minimal points. Like, last week, the Packers really got a gift. Like, Anthony Richardson, guys, I have serious concerns about Anthony Richardson. I just do not think that he is the player that we all thought he had the potential to be. Maybe it happens at some point, but right now, I'm not there. I'm just not there. Now, with the Vikings defense this week, obviously, they've got their own set of issues here dealing with the Texans. That's not a plus matchup by any stretch of the imagination. So I prefer the Packers defense based on matchup this week. They're taking on a mistake-prone Titans offense, and, I mean, you can honestly kind of guarantee that Will Levis throws like a pick or two per game at this point because he is so sloppy. And it's not even just the interceptions, man. I went through this. I think it was on the Monday night, what I got right and wrong. Will Levis, I watched that game, and they were like the Tennessee Titans were at like the 15-yard line relatively early in the game. And they were at the Jets 15. And it was like he was getting brought down for a sack. And he just couldn't help himself. He had to try to make something happen, which part of me can respect that, right? He's trying to make a play. But sometimes you just got to know. Like, just take the sack. Because what he ended up doing was he ended up pitching it back to a running back that wasn't paying attention. And the ball was also too low. So it ended up being a turnover. It's like that guy is making mistakes like nobody else in this league right now. So I would say the Packers defense are probably a better play. Appreciate the super chat, though. Owen Williams, you're up next. What's going on? 8-man league. Keep Williams, wide receiver 3, or move him on. So I'm assuming you're talking about Jameson Williams, right? Jameson Williams, I went through a video today about Jameson Williams and kind of gave you guys a good rundown of what I think about Jameson. when you think about Jameson, and if you've been playing fantasy for years, like, you know just as well as I do, he's been really disappointing. Like, that guy was a top 15 pick, and he has done next to nothing. I mean, he obviously missed basically his entire rookie year, and then when his second season came around, he missed like the first 6 games because of a suspension. And when he came back, he really wasn't that great. So it's like, this is a little bit of a culture shock right now, what I'm witnessing personally with Jameson Williams, because I had kind of written him off at that point. Obviously, 20 targets through 2 games doesn't lie. I mean, it does not lie. My ultimate advice for someone like Jameson Williams is, if you in an 8-man league are 2-0, right? You're 2-0, your roster's stacked, and you're not having issues here, and you can afford to move on from Jameson, that's what I would personally do. Like, for me, if I have Jameson Williams and I'm 2-0, I would probably not start him over a lot of guys. Like, I'm still not there yet with Jameson. I think he's done very well, and I think he will continue to do very well, but I'm not there yet with Jameson. So what I would do personally is, if I had Jameson and I was 2-0, I would be trying to auction him to the highest bidding 0-2 team. Because 0-2 teams right now, like I said, week 1's overreaction week. Week 2 is like you're panicking. If you're 0-2, you're panicking right now. So I think that I would try to target someone who's panicking and see if I could get a major leap up at wide receiver or running back or whatever you need. So that's what I would do personally. I would personally just like sell him to an 0-2 team if I was 2-0. But if you are 0-2, that dude could go in your lineup like that. Like, he shouldn't be on your bench probably because you're 0-2. I mean, Jameson Williams is averaging almost 17 fantasy points per game in a half PPR format. So Jameson's going to have legit like upside, because the targets don't lie. The targets don't lie. That dude is really involved. So Jameson's going to be involved, but I would ultimately, if I was 2-0, I would try to move him. Appreciate the super chat, Owen. Demetrios, what's going on? You're up next. Do I start Gus Bus or the last 2 that I asked? Let's see what you asked. Madison or Braylon Allen? I would start Gus. Yeah, the thing with Gus, and I know it's disappointing. Like, I know it very well. I have Gus Bus in quite a few leagues. Like, both redraft and best ball leagues, I've got quite a bit of Gus Bus. The thing that you need to hold on to, I guess is the best way to put it, is that he's not like uninvolved. Like, the first week he led the team in rushing. Second week he had like 13 carries still. Now, obviously, I said leading up to last week, I think that just because JK did so well week 1, I could easily see Jim Harbaugh being like, well, we're just going to give more touches to JK this week and shorten Gus's workload. And that's exactly what happened. What I can't see this. I can't see a world where Jim Harbaugh convinces himself to make JK the 3-down back. I don't think that's coming. I actually think this is the best case scenario for J.K. Dobbins, that he doesn't have to carry the ball 30 times a game, because the reality is that Harbaugh wants to do that. Like, that is Harbaugh and Greg Roman's plan, is to run to high heaven every single week. That's what Harbaugh does, man. So I actually think that Gus will remain involved. And one of these weeks he will get in the end zone. Like, just because, like, the volume is there and the offensive line is so great that he will get in the end zone one of these weeks. So I think that just him having the consistent workload that those other 2 guys don't, that's why I would play Gus over those 2 other guys, Braylon Allen and Alexander Madison. Appreciate the super chat, man. Up next, we had Jeremy Melendez. What's going on? Flex Bowers or Gabe Davis in the revenge game. Full PPR. Oh, man, I got to tell you, the Jags are a disaster. They really are. I mean, the Jacksonville Jaguars are an utter disaster. Since we're live, I'll tell you guys my bold prediction. I think if the Jags play the way I think if that Buffalo Bills versus Jags game goes the way I think it could go, which would be a blowout, the Bills win in a blowout, I think that Doug Peterson, the head coach, could be fired. I think he could be the first one fired in the NFL. I think it's legitimately possible. And you factor in like the collapse the Jags had last year with the terrible start. I mean, they've been really bad. And the reality is, like, Trevor Lawrence just isn't providing any receiving option with good fantasy upside. Like, the two things that have saved Brian Thomas in his first 2 weeks has been the touchdown he got in week 1 and the big plays that he got in week 2. That's it. That's all that saved Brian Thomas. Brian Thomas is not having 8 targets. Brian Thomas has had 4 targets in both matchups. Gabe Davis actually is... The one thing I'll give Gabe Davis is the games that I've watched, Gabe Davis has actually been used more consistently, like over the middle and on shorter stuff than he ever was in Buffalo. Like, Gabe Davis was involved, has been involved. Like, he's got 10 targets. That's more than anybody else, basically. I think something's going on. I think I'm having issues. We'll give it 1 minute because I do think my camera is having issues. But with Gabe Davis, like, Gabe Davis has really been just, like, he's been involved. So 7 targets in week 2 against the Browns, like, that's a tough matchup for anybody. So I won't really hold Gabe Davis's feet to the fire on that one particularly, because I do think that Gabe Davis does come out and continues to be involved. I mean, like, the reality is, like, they kind of need him. They kind of need Gabe Davis. He's in a situation where Christian Kirk, I think, is cooked. I think Kirk is cooked. And Brian Thomas Jr., as I continue to say, like, I don't think he's ready to take on the number 1 role, truly. Because he's not a route runner. Like, he's not a crisp route runner who's going to go over the middle for a bunch of production. Like, he's just not doing that yet. Gabe Davis, I do think, will be involved. Against the Bills, I do think it's a matchup that they'll be trailing in, so they'll have to throw the ball. Now, with Bowers, I think Bowers is honestly a really good tight end play. Like, I don't know who your tight end is, but unless you have, like, McBride, like, truthfully, like, unless you have McBride or Kittle, I don't really see a world where I'm benching Brock Bowers right now. I just don't. Like, the tight end landscape has been, I mean, as it usually is, unpredictable, and there's only a couple good ones. Bowers has been really consistent. And it's been a shock to me. It's been a major shock to me just seeing how consistent Bowers has been. But the reality is, like, unless you have one of those top 2 tight ends, I don't see, I would play Bowers over Kelce. I would, personally. I would play Bowers over Kincaid. I would play Bowers over Mark Andrews. I mean, that's where I'm at with Bowers. Because it's like, I'm not just ignoring the targets that he's getting on a consistent basis for 2 weeks now. So, like I said, unless you have one of those guys, I can't see myself benching Bowers. But in that scenario where you have to flex one of them, I would say probably flex Bowers. Yeah, I've got no problem with flexing Bowers. I appreciate the super chat. Tom Talks Films, you're up next. What's going on? Should I trade Pitman or hold in half PPR? Man, I just think that it's so hard to trade him. I think it's so hard to trade him and get, I mean, you're not going to get value. Based on where you drafted Pitman, you're not getting the return on investment. And here's the thing, man. Like, the reason I called, if you haven't seen my buy low video yet, came out on Monday, go watch it after the live stream. The reason I called Pitman a buy low is because people, you know, in your situation, it's like you drafted him 3rd, 4th, 5th round, right? So it's like you're expecting more production from Pitman in the long run. And you've been disappointed with what he's done. The one thing with Pitman that makes him a buy low for me this week is the fact that his targets are there. He's out targeting Alec Pierce, who's out producing him. Like, he's still the number 1. So it ultimately, for me, comes down to a belief in Shane Steichen, the offensive coach, to be able to figure out how to get Pitman involved. Like, I think that what I believe Steichen came in thinking he could do more with Anthony Richardson than he actually can, right? Like, I think that he probably thought Richardson would be able to hit on more of the shorter routes and over the middle stuff. The reality is, Anthony Richardson, that dude is not accurate. Like, he is at the very, that's like being nice. Like, he's one of the most inaccurate in the league. And he was in college, too. That was my gripe about him in college, side note. But, the thing with Pitman is that I believe that they will get it going. And the reality is, like, if you sell him now, then you're not going to get return on investment. And I'm a big return on investment guy at pretty much all costs in fantasy. Because if I sold Pitman, like, you're having to get, like, wide receiver 3 territory. I think that he has more upside than most guys in that territory right now. So I would personally hold on to Pitman. Doesn't mean you have to start him this week, but I would hold on to him personally. Appreciate the super chat. Dizzy B, what's going on, man? Good to see you in here. Christian Kirk, London, Keenan Allen, Ladd. Can I flex any? You could flex London for sure. You could flex London. And if Keenan plays, I think you could flex him too. Obviously, London comes out, has a touchdown, finally saves his week. My ultimate, I'm not bought in, back in all of a sudden. I was never really in, but I'm not bought in on Drake London for sure, because Drake London is, he still has 10 targets on the year. He had 3 in week 1, so he had 7 in week 2, which is definitely a step in the right direction, obviously. I just don't think that, watching that game, Mooney was a guy that, honestly, Kirk was kind of looking for in times of duress. So I just think that, London, the plays that were to him, a lot of them were schemed. And it's not that I don't think it'll happen again. It's just, I just think that Kirk does it. I don't think that London's the player everybody thought he was. That's a side note. I'm not trying to get too in the weeds on my London distrust. But I think, of course, he's flexible. The matchup doesn't really worry me against Trent McDuffie this week against the Chiefs. Keenan Allen, I personally think is very flexible. The reason why I think Keenan's flexible is because, number one, he led the team in targets the one game he played. Obviously, in week 1, he had 11 targets. That's regular Keenan Allen stuff. And the thing is, watching Caleb play in week 1 and in week 2, what I saw from Caleb is that, again, in times of duress, that's his guy. Because if you saw it in week 2, I think this honestly proved a major point. Week 2, DJ Moore is obviously the better player. But DJ Moore is also, running, down the field routes, right? He's running less towards the line of scrimmage routes that Keenan Allen does. And Caleb is just not, he's not obviously looking what he looked like in college. He's not having that success. He's not playing, Pac-12 defenses anymore. The dude he was under siege against Houston that night. So based on how bad their offensive line is, I think Keenan, the more he plays, the more that he's just going to be clearly the number 1 target for Caleb Williams at this point. I really do think that. So I think that Keenan is definitely flexible. But of course, Keenan may not play. I wouldn't play Ladd this week, and I'm definitely not. I think, honestly, Christian Kirk could be dropped. I'm at that point with Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk I think he's cooked. Opportunity was there 1,000% last week, and he did nothing. He was a nothing burger. So I would say London is the guy I prefer, but I also think in Keenan Allen's sake, I think he could be flexed as well if he plays. Appreciate the super chat, though. Chuba, what's going on? Should I trade Kiren for Debo and Lazard? That's tough, man. Because if you're 2-0, for example, if you're 2-0 and you've got good depth at running back, and you can also afford to keep Debo on the bench for a couple weeks, then I would say, why not? I think Debo has more upside long season than Kiren does at this point. So I don't have a problem with it on that surface level. Now, the reality is you're going to have to address that. Are you okay with putting Debo on the bench /IR for the next foreseeable future? Because, from what I understand with his Debo injury, he's missing weeks. Not a week. He's missing weeks, plural. So it looks to me like Debo may be out for the next like 3 weeks possibly. So you're gonna have if you trade for Debo, you're gonna have to be ready to put him on your bench /IR for the next 3 weeks. Kiren, I don't love Kiren. Like I think Kiren is a sell high. But I ultimately do think that Kiren, like, you can obviously play him. Lazard, I can't trust, right? Like, Lazard is not in that Kiren class, obviously. I'm not saying that you're saying that. But, if you're 2-0 and you're sitting really good in depth and you just want a high upside player, then I would say, yeah, like, I'm totally fine with trading for Debo right now. Like, if you have... Like, for example, if you have, like, Saquon Barkley and you have J.K. Dobbins or something like that, then I would say totally would do this trade. But if you only have, like, Rachaad White and, like, Derrick Henry, I would be a little bit more shaky doing this trade. So, it really does depend what your situation is. That's what I would say about that. But ultimately, like, I just like the trade standing on its own, personally. Appreciate the super chat. Brendo, what's going on? You were up next. Trade Jacobs for Rasheed and Eckler, hurting at wide receiver. I think you're getting good value for Jacobs if you were to trade him for Rasheed. Like, that's not the question here. I want to know what your running backs are, because, like, the fact that Eckler is, like, you're trying to include Eckler indicates to me that you're not super comfortable at running back. Like, if you were doing the Jacobs for Rasheed thing straight up, like, I think that's, I think that shows me that you're pretty confident with your running back depth. Like, it's similar to what I was just telling Chuba, which is that if you're in a situation where you have Saquon Barkley and, like, J.K. Dobbins or, like, Brian Robinson Jr., I'm okay with doing this trade because you can easily just plug in Brian Robinson or J.K. Dobbins, in that RB2 spot, and then Rashee Rice is automatically an immediate flex guy for the long term. But if you're in a situation, like I said earlier, where you have, like, Kiren Williams and Rachaad White at running back, like, that makes me really nervous because I don't consider Eckler to be a guy that you could just put in your lineup most weeks. Like, right now he's fine. Right now Eckler is flexible. I don't really think he keeps up. Like, Brian Robinson Jr., I think, is going to take this backfield. So I would personally evaluate this one. If you're set at running back and you're comfortable, I think it's a good trade. I like Jacobs a lot too, though. Like, it really does depend on your situation, because I think Rashee Rice and Josh Jacobs, they're both like top 12 options by position at this point. So just because I'm a wide receiver preference guy, I probably would take the Rashee Rice side on this deal, but I also do think that Jacobs is a really good player as well. Appreciate the super chat. All right, we're going to go back up to the top. Back up to the top, and we're going to start answering questions. Let's see. Bruno, what's going on? Got offered DJ Moore and Pacheco for London and Swift. Would y'all take it? So obviously you're going to be taking on a injured player that you're going to have to put in to the IR. Like, that really is the case, like, that you're going to have to do is put a player on IR. I do think that, again, it's always like a situation where I look at it and I say, just evaluate your team, because your team needs ultimately determine how willing I am myself willing to take on Isiah Pacheco. Like, I'll give you my example. Like, if I was in that situation and if I got offered DJ Moore and Pacheco in exchange for London, a player I don't particularly love, and Swift I want gone at all costs, what I would be evaluating myself is whether or not I can handle Pacheco being on my IR for a long time. Like a long, long time. So the only way I would feel comfortable personally doing that is if I had great running back depth and I didn't need him for the foreseeable future. And I didn't need a running back period for the foreseeable future. DJ Moore, I'll make it clear, like, his upside is not that much higher than London's right now. Like, it feels weird to say. DJ Moore is a much better player than Drake London is. But at the same time, like, DJ Moore is not, he's not getting the ball at a consistent level with Caleb Williams. He's getting targeted, but he's not getting the ball very well. So, yeah, I think it just comes down to what your feeling is. Because for me, the only way I would take, I mean, we're not talking about like even just like a 4-week IR stint. We're talking about like 2 months at least with Pacheco, where he's on your IR. So the only way I would do it personally is if I was really comfortable at running back and I didn't have any issues. Okay, we've got to shut some things down. Angel Coronado, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Pick 2 for flex. Wide receivers are Coleman, McLaurin, Dobbs, McConkey, Jahmyr White, Hubbard, Braylon Allen. Also, what tight end should I pick up? Ertz, Gesicki, Henry. Love the channel. Well, I appreciate you being in here, and I appreciate the super chat. Let's go one by one. We're picking 2 for the flex. Wide receivers are Coleman, McLaurin, Dobbs, McConkey. Running backs are Jahmyr, Hubbard, and Braylon Allen. Yeah, this week, like, I'll tell you this. If Jordan Love, if we get news that Jordan Love is playing, then I would say Jordan Love makes Romeo Dobbs a legitimate flex option this week. Out of your options right here, I would like that, to be honest with you. That's the first thought that I have on this. The second thought I have on it is with Keon Coleman, I actually think he's set up to succeed this week. I really do. I really do think he's set up to succeed. I think that with Keon Coleman, everybody make a big stink about what he did in week 2. Obviously, it wasn't good. He came out and he friggin' did nothing. I mean, he was a nothing burger on 1 target. But Keon Coleman this week, like, the Jacksonville game is obviously not a scary matchup. And he doesn't have Jalen Ramsey to deal with. And, you know, depending on whether they blow them out or not, I think they will. But in your situation, like, I cannot envision starting Terry McLaurin right now. I cannot envision it. I think it's a disaster. So I think that McLaurin is no way, like, no how am I putting him in my starting lineup right now. I think that if we get news that Jordan Love's going to play, I would flex Dobbs as one of them personally. Now, if we don't get that news, I think my 2 guys are going to have to be Coleman and Jahmyr White this week. Jahmyr White, I've actually seen quite a bit of dialogue this week about Jahmyr. Obviously, Jahmyr's matchup is great, right? Like, Jahmyr's matchup against the Raiders is fantastic. Or not the Raiders, my God. Against the Panthers this week, like, it doesn't get better. It literally doesn't get better than this. So I've seen a lot of people say, like, if Jahmyr fails this week, it's over. Like, he's gone. He's not on my roster anymore, and I can't blame anybody for thinking that. I would probably do the same thing. So I agree. I think that Jahmyr would, in this situation, I would play Jahmyr and Dobbs if he has Love, or Jahmyr and Keon Coleman. And then what tight end should you pick up? Ertz, Gesicki, or Henry? You know, it's gonna be Ertz for me. It really will be. I mean, what we've seen with Ertz is consistency. I've been saying this for a while, like, Ertz is going to be a consistent target for Jaden Daniels in this offense. Like, there's no question to me that he really likes to use Zach Ertz, Jaden Daniels, that is. And Ertz is not, like, he's not the player he used to be, obviously, but he still can get it done to a certain extent. With Gesicki, like, I need more than just 1 week personally. And I think in week 1, I think if I remember it correctly, he actually had a touchdown in that game that got called back versus the Patriots. So it's like Gesicki is getting close for me, but we're not there yet. And then Henry, like, obviously there's the Hooper factor. Austin Hooper was more involved in week 1. And I just saw it too much last year where I was like wanting to play Hunter Henry a lot. And then he would just like come out and take a dump all over you the next week. Right? Like, so it's like I can't trust Henry just yet. The guy that I've seen most consistency out of is Ertz. So I would personally pick up Ertz out of these guys and appreciate the super chat. JBU, you're up next. What's going on? Full PPR, trade Zay or DK for Ayuk rest of season? Zay Flowers I think, is a decent guy to have, right? Like, I think Zay is going to be, I mean, he's one of the leading receivers and targets this year so far. And I think that's a pretty fair thing to think happens moving forward. I mean, because, like, we're not talking about a big play threat here with Zay. Like, there's no such thing really as a big play threat in the Ravens offense as far as wide receivers go. That really doesn't exist. So the one guy that you need is a target guy. And that's what Zay is. Like, he's consistently getting tons of targets as opposed to someone like a Rashid Shaheed who works exclusively off big plays, basically. Dude doesn't even have 10 targets this year. Like, that's the difference here with Zay. Now, with Ayuk, there's going to be, without question, more emphasis on getting him the ball while Debo and McCaffrey are out. So even though Ayuk hasn't been good, like, they have no choice. What else are they doing? Are they really going to make Juwan Jennings the wide receiver 1? I would assume that Kittle is the biggest benefactor of it. That's why Kittle is must start. Like, he's always must start anyways, but, like, right now, in this time of need, like, he's clearly must start. So I think that Ayuk is going to be fine because they're going to have to keep using him, right? I ultimately think that for DK as well, like, that's just, there's no way that I could really do either one of these guys, honestly, because, like, with DK, he's going to get targets and he's going to get big plays. Like, I'm coming around on DK a little bit after watching this offense. I do think they look improved versus last year. So I'm actually coming back around on DK. Zay, I also think that he's just the number 1 target there long season. And Ayuk has this window, I think, where he's going to be, like, really good. And it may sting if you don't do it. But I think long-term, Ayuk is probably not the guy I would prefer over either of these guys at this point. So I would personally stick with both Zay and DK Metcalf. Appreciate the super chat, though. Tom Talks Films, what's going on? Trade Ridley and Singletary for Ayuk or Devonta Smith. Wide receivers are Ridley, Rice, Harrison, Pitman, and running backs are Swift, Achane, Cook, and Madison. So Ridley, Singletary for Ayuk, and Devonta Smith. Ridley's decent right now. Like, the only reason I don't prefer Ridley in a lot of situations is because of Will Levis. Like, that's the only question I have. There's no question who the wide receiver 1 is. None at all. I've got no reservations about DeAndre Hopkins or Tyler Boyd. It's Calvin Ridley's show. What it ultimately comes down to is Will Levis, man. Like, Will Levis is a disaster. I mean, he really is. But credit to him, he's been good enough to provide Calvin Ridley some good performances in fantasy so far this year. Like, really, it was mostly the week 2 game that he was really good. But, you know, in week 1, like, he was involved on 7 targets against the Bears. So, you know, Ridley's a good player. Now, with Devonta Smith is going to be a guy that I probably see more safety in. Like, I think that he's going to be a really, like, I called him a bust-proof player before the actual year started for a reason. Like, I think that in this Kellen Moore offense, he is bust-proof. And I don't think it changes all of a sudden. Like, the difference right now is that he's going to have a window of upside without A.J. Brown. Like, last week, week 2 versus the Falcons, honestly, is kind of like low end of what I think Devontae can do without A.J. Brown. So, like, I think that Devontae is a really good option. But I do think that Ridley probably presents the most upside. I really do think that. Like, Ridley presents quite a few. He presents quite a bit of upside. And, like, your wide receiver room, you've got Rice and Harrison. And I know that Harrison's only coming off one good game. But I honestly think of Harrison as more of a safety guy. Like, I really do. I think that he clearly has the ceiling that he showed in week 2. I actually think he's a really good safety net receiver to have as well. So I don't think of him as just like a big play threat. The one guy I do think of it as like that is Ridley. So in my opinion, like, I prefer to have some spike weeks from the Ridley situation rather than like Ayuk, who will provide spike weeks, but probably not as consistent because he's not getting the target share consistently that Calvin Ridley will. And then with Devonta Smith, like, he'll have good weeks, but I do ultimately think, like, we haven't seen it yet, but he's going to have games where he has like 3 or 4 points. I mean, that's Devonta Smith's reality. So I'd probably stick with Ridley personally. I just think that Ridley has honestly a ridiculous amount of upside. It really just comes down to whether or not you're willing to take on the risk that comes with Will Levis. Appreciate the super chat though. Demetrios, what's going on? Start 3. Tyreek Hill, Rashee Rice, DK, and Godwin. You've got good problems, man. You've got really good problems to have. It's always good to have these type of issues here because, I mean, obviously not all of them are going to hit. Like, the likelihood they all 4 hit is low. So, like, one of them may disappoint you. But for me personally, like, I think Rashee Rice is absolutely must start right now. He's the highest ranked wide receiver for me this week in this group because Rashee Rice is basically on his own. Like, no Pacheco. He's the wide receiver 1. And I don't imagine that running back with Carson Steele, whether it's Carson Steele and Samaje Perine, I don't imagine either guy getting a bunch of work. So, yeah, for me this week, I think Rashee Rice is easily must start. I think Godwin is must start too. I think Godwin at this point, like, I had to take my heels out of the mud on this one. Like, I was so... when I talk about players and, like, how I don't like them, everybody needs to understand, like, I don't... There's nothing personal about this. Like, it has nothing to do with that. I've just never liked... I haven't liked Chris Godwin for years now because since the torn ACL, like, he hasn't been the same guy. This year, he looks like that dude again. So, I think that Godwin, right now, like, you cannot sit him. That dude is red hot with that offense against the Broncos this week, on a week where Mike Evans is probably going to be the receiver who's going to be locked up by Pat Surtain. I think that Godwin's going to have a lot of good plays this week. So I would go Rashee Rice and Godwin for sure. Really, the ultimate question is, how much do I trust? Probably going to be Skylar Thompson this week with Tyreek or DK this week. Like, DK, the matchup versus Jalen Ramsey, it's up or down, right? Like, I think DK is good enough to beat Ramsey at this point of Ramsey's career, but, you know, DK is also hot and cold. Whereas Tyreek, like, I'm convinced Tyreek is still going to be really good in fantasy. Like, I'm 100% confident in it because they're going to just get him the ball. I mean, they're going to find ways to get him the ball. So I think that gut call here, I would take Tyreek. I would take Tyreek Hill just because I think that they cannot afford to not give him the ball. Like, in any way they possibly can. Like, that's their best shot of winning games, by getting him the ball in any way they can. So I would go with Tyreek, Rashee, and Chris Godwin out of that group. Appreciate the super chat, though. Jordan, what's going on? You were up next. Jordan 8821. I got Tyreek, Kupp, James Cook, Alvin Kamara, Trey McBride, Amari Cooper, Xavier Worthy, but now hesitant because Kupp and Tua injury. Should I trade 2-0. Yeah, I know it's tough, like when you have the injuries that ravage your team a little bit. You're 2-0, and like I'll tell you this, like neither Tua or Kupp helped you get to 2-0. They helped you get to 1-0, but not 2-0. So the reason I say that is because I think it's always good to keep things in perspective. Like long term, I get what you're saying. The upside is not going to be there in your receiver room without Kupp, because the reality is like Kupp may not play in the next 5 or 6 weeks. It from what I saw, like he may be out longer than just 4 weeks. So I think that your other receivers here with Tyreek, your other receivers here with Worthy and Cooper, I just I don't really know what you could do to realistically upgrade your team without downgrading it. That's the thing, is like your options right now, since you do have Kupp on the IR and you've got Tyreek without Tua, like Tyreek's value has dropped. That's why I called him a buy low this week. People thought I was crazy for saying it. Like the reality is he is a buy low because his value is not where you drafted him at right now. So I just think that you can't, like, I am not on board with sending Tyreek Hill right now, because I know that the guy he's going to get the ball. They're going to make sure he gets the ball. So I think I would tread cautiously on this one. There's really not enough room for error, unfortunately, since you have injuries to make a trade. And you're 2-0, I don't think you should be panicking, be panic selling, because if you were 0-2, it'd be different. If you were 0-2 and you had some injuries, I would say, yeah, let's look at some trades here. You're 2-0. And the reality, again, why I said it, is because neither Tyreek or Cooper Kupp helped you get to 2-0. They helped you get to 1-0, but they did not help you get to 2-0. You got to 2-0 with James Cook and Alvin Kamara and Trey McBride. So you're going to be fine. I would not trade anybody yet, because the reality is, like, you just don't need to right now. And you don't have a ton of wiggle room to make a mistake since you do have injuries. Appreciate the super chat. Who's up next? Pablo Bautista, what's going on? You were up next. Appreciate the super chat. I only have one starting running back, Jordan Mason. I have wide receivers Rice, Marvin Harris Jr., and Mike Evans. I traded Mike Evans for Zach Moss and Tony Pollard. Thoughts? So you only have one with Jordan Mason, and he's not even a long-term guy, more than likely. I mean, I'm going to leave the door open that McCaffrey doesn't play this year, just because this has been so weird. So, in all likelihood, you do have a short-term rental at running back one. Good one, but he's short-term rental. Rashee Rice, Marvin Harris Jr., Mike Evans, obviously great receivers. So you traded Mike Evans for Zach Moss and Tony Pollard. You know, I think that Pollard is going to be a really solid fantasy asset at this point. I think that, for me personally, with Tony Pollard, I want to rank him higher. Like, I really do. I really do want to rank him higher. I can't get there quite yet because of the offense. And they do seem to want to throw the ball first. Like, Tennessee does seem to want to throw. Now, with Tyjae Spears probably being out this week, I do think that Pollard could easily have an explosion game against the Packers. But Mike Evans, it's tough, man, because Mike Evans coming off a bad week. Like, don't want to undersell him. Moss has potential. Like, Moss, in my opinion, is waiting to break out. Now, he's obviously not Joe Mixon. And that's, I think, part of the reason the Bengals have struggled to establish a run game, because they undervalued Joe Mixon, right? Like, they undervalued him. And it was more than that, but, like, we won't get into it, why they let him go. But with Moss, like, once the Bengals get it going, and I'll tell you this, they will get it going. At some point, they're going to get it going. And Moss becomes that immediate guy that goes from like a guy who really nobody wants to he rips off a couple straight like 1 touchdown performances, and he's going to become more valuable. So like I think that you had to do what you had to do, right? Like you have Jordan Mason and you have cross your fingers for like a spike week best ball style, right? So you had to do what you had to do here. I understand the reason you did it, and the receiver I probably would trade out of that bunch would have been Evans. So I think you did what you had to do, and I don't have a huge problem with it because I think, like I said, I think Pollard could end up being a really good fantasy asset. Appreciate the super chat, Pablo. SHNC27, what's going on? Which running backs should I target in a trade for Pitman? Wide receivers are Lamb, Ayuk, Pitman, Addison, Dobbs. Running backs are Achane, Warren, and Spears. I mean, really, like, with Pitman, again, the reason I'm all in on buying Pitman low right now is because the reality is when you send out offers after, you know, whether you do it after I tell you to or not, or whether you decide not to, the reality is if you decide to send out offers for Pitman right now, you're going to be looking at guys like Jahmyr White. I mean, that's like the reality of it, because Pitman has done not much more in fantasy than Jahmyr White. I mean, Pitman right now, like, I'm bringing up his numbers. Michael Pitman, 7 receptions on 15 targets for 52 yards and not a touchdown. 4.4 fantasy points per game. Now, let's line up Jahmyr White. Jahmyr White, 22 carries, 68 yards, 4.5 yards a carry. I mean, that's really what we're looking at here. Is like, the argument would be like, you know, both of them are starting number ones technically, but they're both underperforming. So like, what are you going to do with that, right? I mean, on the high end, like I'm always like the type of guy in my league that I always like to negotiate. I'm in leagues, like I'm in some random leagues, like with people I don't know quite as well. But a lot of my leagues, like I know these people, like I've grown up with them, their family. So like I like to negotiate, right? Like I like to actually physically talk to and negotiate. And so I usually like to go for higher. Like for me, Pitman, if I was to trade him away, I would shoot for someone like a Kenneth Walker, because the injury, like if I could raise somebody's doubt enough to where I could get a Kenneth Walker out of them, I'd feel really good about myself. And that's kind of your best case scenario. Because again, like most people are going to look at Pittman's numbers and look at the running backs on their team and be like this dude is not worth like a legitimate starter at this point. So that's my warning to you is if you decide to trade Pitman, you have to have low expectations, because around like the Jahmyr White territory or the Chuba Hubbard territory or maybe the Zeke or the Rico Dowdle territory is probably what you'll get. You could try to shoot for someone like a Zach Moss. I think Zach Moss might be a viable option too. Maybe an ETN. I don't think you'd get that though. So I would say like your high-end guys that you would try to go for, start out with Kenneth Walker, because I think he kind of brings a good argument. If you can't get a Kenneth Walker type, I'd probably shoot for Zach Moss or ETN. But the reality is, like I said, like I'm not trying to be negative. Like I go into trades with optimism. Like that's a thing that I personally do because I like to negotiate in trades. The reality is in your situation, like there just isn't much upside to negotiate with Pitman right now, other than the fact that he has lots of targets. So don't be surprised if you don't get much engagement from people from when you like offer Pitman for those high-end guys. Like that's kind of what I'm thinking might happen. Appreciate the super chat. So let's go back to the top and answer some questions. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if y'all haven't done so already. Appreciate y'all being in here. We're going to answer several more questions. Thoughts on Dobbins rest of season? I love him. I mean, I love Dobbins. I mean, Dobbins, like, Dobbins, I've been so wild on him. And when you're wild on a player coming out of college and they don't perform, it's extremely deflating. Like, I remember Dobbins when he came out of college. I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, for those of you who may not know. Fantasy analysis comes first for me. But when J.K. Dobbins was coming out of Ohio State, I was like hoping and praying that the Steelers drafted him. I wanted J.K. Dobbins so bad because I loved him. I thought he was great. Now, obviously, his career's been ravaged by injuries. No fault of his own. So, after several years of that, it's like, I could understand how it beat down a player's, spirit. Like, it beat down mine as a fantasy manager of J.K. Dobbins, right? But J.K., like, I'm honestly genuinely happy to see this production from him because I love the player, and he's been elite. I mean, he's been elite. And, again, one thing that I was talking about all offseason with these Chargers options was that I really wanted a Chargers running back one way or the other. I wanted a Chargers running back one way or the other. Whether it was J.K. Dobbins, whether it was Gus Edwards, whether it was Kamani Vidal, the rookie. I wanted one because I know what we're going to get from a Chargers running back. If one of these guys handles the majority of the backfield, they're going to be elite in fantasy football because Jim Harbaugh wants to run the ball. That's what he does everywhere. Stanford days, 49ers days, Michigan days, and now with the Chargers. He's running it down people's throats at a successful clip. So I think that J.K. Dobbins is a guy, like, if people in your league who have Dobbins are even slightly uncertain about, I'm willing to trade for him. The only concern I could possibly have at this point with J.K. Dobbins is the chance of injury. Just because of history. That's the only thing. So I think that ultimately, like, J.K., based on, like, what he's done, I'm all in on him. The only concern I could possibly have with J.K. at this point is his chance of injury, which is viable, right? Like, he's been injured several times, notably throughout his career. But he looks fantastic, so I'm going to ride the lightning with J.K. Dobbins because I know the Chargers' offensive line is set up for this, and I know, like, there's a reason. Like, if you guys remember the draft, the Chargers were sitting there at the number 5 spot, and the debate was, are they going to pick Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors? They said, nah, we're going to pick Joe Alt at the tackle position because he's elite. People thought it was crazy. And I was like, that's like exactly what I expected to happen because this is a Jim Harbaugh team. They want to run the ball down your throat. So, yeah, I think that Dobbins, man, I really love Dobbins in fantasy. Like, I would take him throughout the rest of the season without a question. If anyone's even slightly concerned with Dobbins and uncertain about him, I would take that opportunity to trade for him in a heartbeat. Alex Voigt, dynasty question. Are you trading an early 25 second for Rachaad White? No, I'm not. Rachaad White is he's sinking in fantasy value. Rachaad White has never been efficient. And this dude is 25 years old. Like, so next year he'll be 26, which is not a good age for running backs in Dynasty to buy. So I think a second round pick, like, I would take my chances personally because I'm so deep in the Dynasty game that, like, I think I could get good players at the second round. I would just rather not have my hands full with Rachaad White. I mean, really, legitimately, guys, like, I do think that there is a decent shot that Rachaad White loses his job to Bucky Irving at some point. I mean, Bucky Irving has been better literally at every point than Rachaad White. Rachaad White is averaging 2 freaking yards a carry. I won't go into the rant I did on the running back rankings. I'll just leave it at that. Like, I think that there's a legit chance Bucky Irving takes this job from Rachaad White. So I would personally just say, stick with your second rounder, man. David Ezekiel, what's going on? Should I trade Dak and Waddle for Burrow and Pickens? I have Chase and want to pair him with Burrow. I love the move. Yeah, I love the move. The reality, like, with Pickens is that Pickens is going to have more upside. Not more. I would say he's probably around the same level of upside as Waddle does for the foreseeable future without Tua. I mean, because what you have to think about, like, with a trade is with Waddle, the reason I think, like, I was saying, like, as soon as the injury happened with Tua and, like, we were able to process things, I was like, man, like, I'm trying to sell Waddle right away. Like, I'm trying to buy Tyreek, I'm trying to sell Waddle. So I think that, personally, like, because the problem with him is Tua's going to miss at least the next 4 games, right? What happens after that? Because the ultimate problem here, and I don't like to talk about this too much, man, but, like, the reality with this situation is this is not just, like, a simple team decision. Like, this is media pressure that's on the Dolphins. They have legitimate pressure from the media and from the league as a result because the league ultimately has the media pressure. So, I think that's annoying, but it is what it is. I mean, Tua is a man. He can decide whether or not he wants to play, right? Like, that's just the reality with that situation. Like, I don't really like to see the grandstanding of people saying, like, he needs to retire. It's like, I would retire, right? Like, if that was me, I would retire. If it was a family member, I would encourage retirement. But the dude's a man with $200 million on the line. Like, it's not that simple for many people, right? So, like, the point of me saying that is, like, if they clear Tua to play, then they've got so much money on the line that with this contract, if he was medically cleared to play and they didn't let Tua play, then there would be like legitimate, like, that would be a contract nightmare because he's got like 250 plus on the line. So it's not just as simple as saying, like, we don't want to see you back out there, man. It's like, well, then give me my friggin' money because I'm ready to play. I was medically cleared and you're not letting me play. So it's a mess, man. And Jalen Waddle, I think, is the guy who suffers the most from this whole deal. Because Tyreek, I said, they're going to get ways to get him the ball. He's the number one. He's an elite player. Waddle's a great number 2, but he's going to suffer the most from this. And Pickens here, I think that Pickens is just in a situation where he's clearly the number 1 on a bad offense as well. So it's like, I would probably rather have Pickens in the short term, and in the long term, I'd rather have Burrow over Dak personally. So I would go ahead and stack Burrow with Jahmyr. That's what I would personally do here. Jameson Williams, what's going on? Should I start Pickens or Shaheed this week? It's close. They're in the same tier for me, which makes it like kind of tomato, like take your pick. Because you're not in a situation where Shaheed is clearly the wide receiver 1, right? Like, he's not the wide receiver 1. It's clear that he's not. He's only had 8 targets this year. He's just so happened to hit on big plays. It's very similar to Alec Pierce in Indianapolis right now, where it's like, that guy is making the most out of every opportunity, which good on them. But the reality is, like, that does not keep up throughout an entire fantasy season. But this week against the Eagles, man, like, it's hard to say no to that matchup because the Eagles defense is, like, I thought they were going to be much better. Vic Fangio, there's something wrong because that defense let the Falcons carve them up. Specifically on that last drive, it was an embarrassment, actually, with Vic Fangio at coordinator. That was an embarrassment. So I think for me personally, like, I probably would take Shaheed over George Pickens this week because I like the matchup quite a bit with Rashid Shaheed. So I would bank on the big play again this week against the Eagles. Godzilla Toes, what's going on? Should I bench Jalen Waddle for Brian Thomas Jr. or Ladd McConkey? That's a tough one, man. It really is. Because, like I was just saying, I think Waddle is going to suffer the most out of all these guys. With McConkey, the matchup isn't great versus the Steelers, and he did take a step back last week. Now, I think that Chargers offense is kind of like, specifically the receiving core, it's going to be kind of a combination. I do think Ladd ends the year as the wide receiver 1 in Los Angeles, but I think he's going to have a lot of bad games, and I don't think this is a particularly great game for him. Brian Thomas Jr. against the Bills, I can see the merit because I think he's the wide receiver 1 at this point. For better or for worse, I do think he's the wide receiver 1. So I think Brian Thomas Jr. probably be the guy I would play. Honestly, I do think that that's the move because the game against the Bills, like, they're going to be down. They're going to be down in that game, and I do think they're going to have to play catch up. And Brian Thomas Jr., like, that's going to be a good game situation for him where he could just run deep balls and try to hit on some big plays. So I would probably start Brian Thomas Jr. over Jalen Waddle this week. TJM, Gibbs or Garrett Wilson? Gibbs. Yeah, I would take Gibbs. Gibbs is fine, guys. Like, it was kind of like I was saying this on the running back ranking video today. If you haven't seen that, go back and watch it. You see all top 30. Gibbs, for me, is like, it reminds me so much of the start of last year, where Gibbs was going higher in drafts than he ever should have been. Because the reality was he was not going to start out the year as a running back 1. He ends up having a bad, like, first 6 weeks of the year. And after that time, I was like, this is the time to trade for Gibbs. And people by that time were like, I'm out. I'm out on Gibbs. Why would I trade for him? Gibbs is in a situation, and then obviously he finished the year great. Gibbs this year, it reminds me very much of it, except it's a little different. He's playing well. Like, the dude is playing really good football, and in fantasy football, he's been good. He's averaging just under 15 fantasy points per game in a half PPR format. So in a full PPR format, that dude's crushing it because he's getting 7 targets per game right now. So, you know, the one problem I think that people have with Gibbs, again, similar to last year, is that they don't feel great looking at him, that they had to take like the first or back of the second round at the very latest, and watching someone like Saquon go right around him, or, you know, like Bijan go around, and Bijan, he's actually been better than Bijan. I don't actually understand really people's gripe with Jahmyr Gibbs right now. I really don't. Like, he's been really good in fantasy. And he will, the reality is, like, this is kind of his floor. That's the good thing. Is like, let me just make a public service announcement. Because I don't think everybody gets it. This is what Gibbs' floor is, really. Because what you're seeing here is Gibbs without the touchdown upside. So imagine when he hits the massive games, or he breaks off like 3 or 4 enormous runs in a ball game. Like, that will happen. And he will get you 35 points. This is his floor that we're seeing right now. So I think personally that Gibbs is a really good play every week. And I think Wilson's a buy low guy. But at the end of the day, like, he's not in Jahmyr Gibbs' category because he's not producing like that. So that's what I would do personally. Brandon He traded DeMarcus Robinson for Zach Moss. W? Yeah, I think so. I think so because DeMarcus Robinson, like, the reality with him that I've been kind of addressing quite a bit is that, look, DeMarcus Robinson, like, on paper, a lot of people like to believe that he's going to be the wide receiver 1. And I can understand where people are coming from, for sure, because, like, he's the guy with the most veteran experience. Like, you look at the other guys, Tyler Johnson has been in this league, but he's not really done much in the league. Tutu Atwell has had a couple good moments at best. Jordan Whittington is obviously a rookie, right? Like, so it's like, you add in all those 4 guys up, and it's like, you know, everybody like that I've seen on fantasy football YouTube, like, it's been saying, yeah, like, DeMarcus Robinson's the guy. It's like, I'm not so sure about that. Like, it could easily be Tutu Atwell. It could easily be, like, the way I could see it playing out is, like, Tutu Atwell gets a bunch of targets. And DeMarcus Robinson and Tyler Johnson split big plays. That's what I could see, right? Like, so I don't think that there's, like, Marcus Robinson is not coming in and taking over a Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp role. Like, that's not happening. So I don't understand like the big like gap for people in the fantasy community. Honestly, on this one with Robinson, it's not like he's some elite player, right? So I think getting Zach Moss, like you're getting a clear running back one in fantasy, not in fantasy, on his team in Cincinnati, an offense that is good and is about to explode. The Bengals just take time, and it's been like this every year. So I think personally that this is a great move. Yeah, I think getting Zach Moss was a great move. TBR07. How much of an upgrade is JT over Derrick Henry? Ooh, I want to say a bunch, but I really don't know. I really don't. I think I know. Like, I'm pretty confident he's an upgrade over JT or over Derrick Henry. I mean, the thing with Henry right now that we're dealing with here is that with Derrick Henry, he's getting saved by touchdowns. He doesn't look very efficient. And I don't even think it's all his fault. Like, he doesn't look like the same player to me, but a lot of it does have to do with the offensive line. That offensive line is atrocious. And it's very not Ravens-like. Jonathan Taylor, like, if you watch the player, that dude's getting work on every play. Like, he's averaging 5.5 yards per carry through 2 weeks. But he's not getting the volume. Like, Henry's getting more volume than him. And the problem, like, I never expected this with Jonathan Taylor. He doesn't get targets. So unless he gets, like, 20 carries per game, it's not great. It's not a great situation. I think, like, I'm like 90% confident JT is, like, at the very least, like, a tier above Derrick Henry and, like, 4 or 5 spots above Henry for me. But I will say, like, they need to get it going with Henry. I mean, with Jonathan Taylor. I mean, they have no excuse. It's not like Anthony Richardson's crushing it through the air. Like, they need to use Jonathan Taylor way more than they're doing right now. So I think that he is the upgrade, but you know it's a closer one than I would like. Gabriel Polk, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. I'm 0-2. I still like my team. Make any moves? Yeah, I don't know what your roster is. Okay, I think I see it up here. Murray, Gibbs, Mason, Nico, Tyreek Hill, Laporta, Rice, Raiders, Santos. Bench is Waddle, Brian Thomas Jr., Pollard, Braylon Allen, Bixby, Bucky, and Quentin Johnston. I don't know how you're 0-2. Honestly, I really don't. Like, your team is really, really exceptional. I don't think I would make any moves either. I mean, truthfully, like, what were you playing, like, the 2 highest scoring teams in the league? Like, and you're the third? Because, like, I genuinely don't understand how you're 0-2 in this situation. Your team's really good. So I would not bail water at this point. You're going to be fine. Your team is in really good shape. There's not a single thing that I can think I would upgrade here. You have great 2 running back ones, and you've got a great backup running back on your bench with Brian Thomas Jr. and Tony Pollard. You've got great receivers. Literally, I am like dumbfounded how you're 0-2. I really am. I really am dumbfounded. The only thing I can think of is if you were playing the number 1 and number 2 scoring teams in your league so far, and they had like Brock Bowers and George Kittle or Trey McBride. That's the only way I could see it. So I wouldn't make any moves. Yeah, I think you're in great shape. You're gonna be fine. Trust the process on this one. That's like a cliche I don't love to use that much, but I do think in this situation it really does apply to your situation. So I would hang tight. I appreciate the super chat. Let's go back up to the top. Guys, I'm going from top to bottom answering questions. So if you want to get your question answered immediately, the best way to do that is to do a super chat. That is how you jump the line, and it supports the channel. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And check out the Aaron Rodgers line on Underdog. The link is in the description. Half a yard. Of course he's hitting that freaking thing. So go down to Underdog, use the code FN to get in on that Aaron Rodgers line. So back up at the top here. Your boy asks, rest of season, Chargers or Bucks defense? Probably the Chargers. I haven't done rest of season rankings yet at the defensive position. Usually the first time I really evaluate for rest of season is after week 4. Because as I always say, fantasy football should be looked at in 4 quarters. First quarter is weeks 1 through 4. Second quarter is 5 through 8. Third quarter is 9 through 12. And fourth quarter is the last 5 weeks. So things change like that, right? So I think, I think personally that this is a situation where the Chargers look the best in fantasy football. The Bucs defense is actually really good in real life. Now, the Chargers defense is good in real life too, but they're actually doing well in fantasy football as opposed to the Bucs defense. The Bucs defense hasn't done very good in fantasy yet. I think they'll have better weeks. They've obviously got some cupcake divisional opponents like the Carolina Panthers they still have to play. But yeah, I think ultimately the Chargers defense looks really good. They've got so many dudes, and that's probably what I would lean right now. Two Bird Studio, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Rachaad White and Pitman for Jonathan Taylor, full PPR. Yeah, I would do that. For sure. I think that those two guys, honestly, I don't know how you would do this trade. If you can do it, that's fantastic. Like, because Rachaad White and Pittman, they're both bailing water right now. They're both atrocious fantasy players. So if you can do that, great on you. Like, honestly. Because I would imagine, like, myself, there's very, very little chance I would be able to get this done in my own leagues. But if you can get this done, fantastic. Like, that's a clear move you want to make. Jonathan Taylor is disappointing right now, but he's not as bad as Rachaad White and Michael Pittman. So I think this is a good move to do if you could pull it off. I'm not convinced you can, but if you can, fantastic. Of course I would do that. Appreciate the super chat. We're back up at the top here. Joe Gonzalez, who benefits from Kansas City Chiefs backfield? You know, it's hard to tell, right? Like, right now it's hard to tell because they just signed Kareem Hunt to the practice squad, which I think is, again, a very important distinction. And I think people get it because nobody is really, like, from what I've seen, like, been really jumping up and down to get Kareem Hunt. Or at least I haven't seen it, right? Like, obviously Kareem Hunt, based on his entire career, is the better option between himself and Carson Steele, for example. But the one thing I'll say with Carson Steele is that it looks like he's getting first crack. Like, Andy Reid has talked well about him this week, and it's kind of what you have to do as a coach, obviously. But I don't look at this situation and say to myself, like, they're immediately going to put Kareem Hunt out there. I think my theory is that they put Kareem Hunt on the practice squad to get him back into football shape. I don't think he's in football shape right now. So I think that the reason that he's on practice squad right now is to get back into shape. So that's my guess is that he's going to be more involved. But Carson Steele right now, I think, is probably the biggest benefactor. Now, obviously, the wild card and all that is that he is in a situation where there's a Samaje Perine. He's a curveball, right? Like, Samaje Perine is there, and I would be shocked if Carson Steele took both the carries and the reception work. I think he probably leads the backfield in carries, which makes me want him. At the same time, I could see a world where Samaje becomes Jerick McKinnon 2.0. But here's the one thing I do know for certain. I do know for a fact that I want a Chiefs running back, and I do think that they will be in situations where at the goal line, Carson Steele gets those carries. So I would prefer Carson Steele as of right now in the Chiefs backfield. And again, I just ultimately just want a Chiefs running back. Like, I want a running back that's on the Kansas City Chiefs, period, end of story. So whether it's Carson Steele, whether it's Kareem Hunt, whether it's Samaje Perine, sign me up, honestly. Because the Chiefs offense is going to get it done somehow, some way. So that's what I would say. The Smitty, what's going on? 2 quarterback flex league. Would you trade Ramondre or Mason for Josh Allen? My other running backs are Steele and Javonte Williams. I would trade Ramondre for Josh Allen, but I wouldn't trade Jordan Mason. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, right? Like, it sounds like I'm not thinking big picture here. Your other running backs are Steele and Javonte, which are problems, obviously. But in a 2 quarterback flex league, like, that's the thing about those super flex leagues. Like, if you get 2 elite quarterbacks, your upside on a weekly basis is so high, even if you have like 2 RB2s, which, you know, in your situation, in this case, Carson Steele or Ramondre would be. Ramondre's outplaying, I think, what he ultimately does long season. So I think that I would personally do it with Ramondre, not Jordan Mason. And yeah, that's what I would do. Brian Sykes, what's going on? Who do I start at quarterback this week? Anthony Richardson, Geno, or Caleb? AR is my go-to, but I am giving the Bears defense too much respect by considering benching him for either alternative. Yeah, I think the Bears defense, you're giving them the right amount of respect. Like, I don't think you're giving them too much or too little. Like, the Bears defense needs to be respected. They're legit. The Bears defense is not a walk in the park. So I think personally, like, I would personally, without revealing too much, because the quarterback rankings video is tomorrow, I would probably play Anthony Richardson. But again, I won't reveal too much. I thought I saw a chat down here, but it went away. Kelce Curtis, what's going on? Is it even worth a bench spot for the Ravens defense? Not for me. Not for me. I mean, the reality, the Ravens defense has looked pretty bad. I mean, they've had that Raiders opportunity was like on a silver platter. I mean, in Baltimore, off a loss that's really close to the Chiefs, that defense should have eaten against the Raiders, and they didn't. That, like, provides me legitimate concern. And I also, like, I'm not a big proponent of having 2 defenses on your roster. Unless you're in, like, a deeper league. Like, middle to deeper leagues, I'm fine. If you're in a regular redraft ESPN league where you have, like, 6 bench spots, I'm not putting a defense on there because you just have too little depth at each position. So I would say, like, what good are they doing you sitting on your bench right now? Like, you're not going to play them, right? So it's like you don't play them, they're going to sit there on your bench and just probably continue to rot. Now, I'm not saying, like, the Ravens defense all year is going to be bad, but I will say, like, very, very big concerns for me personally as a guy who thought the Ravens defense was going to be one of the best in fantasy this year. They've looked the exact opposite. They've looked atrocious so far. So I would say drop the Ravens defense. I mean, there's just really, they're not doing you any good on your bench right now. Let's see what else. Brendan Sherlock, Malik Neighbors, and Xavier Worthy for Jamar Chase. Yeah, I probably would, because long term, like I know it's gonna piss people off, and that's okay. Like I get where people are coming from if they get pissed off. I think long term Malik Neighbors is not gonna do that kind of production. Like it's obviously we had our two top rookie wide receivers blow the roof off the place in week 2. Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors just absolutely lit the place on fire. So it's like you kind of want to believe that, there's going to be consistency there. With Malik Neighbors, it's not as likely because he has Daniel Jones. Like that is a problem that can't be overlooked. They played the best, most favorable matchup for any receiver. That's why I think Jahmyr is about to go off. I think Jahmyr is going to have like a 40-point game. Honestly, I think it very well could happen. So I prefer Jahmyr longer season because of Joe Burrow and the fact that he is fighting for a contract. So I would prefer Jahmyr still over Malik Neighbors. And Worthy, I do think is a legit low-key guy I want to keep right now because without Hollywood, and especially now without Pacheco, I actually think that boosts Xavier Worthy's ceiling. Now, so like for me personally, like if you could maybe sneak in somebody else in there, like if you have like a Michael Pitman that you could throw in there, that's something I would do personally. Because I do want to keep Ja'Marr Chase. I do. I just can't. I'm not there right now. I'm not there right now with Malik Neighbors. So I would probably take Chase. Adam Pecoraro, what's going on? Pecoraro, appreciate the super chat. Need to start 2. Jerome Ford, Kelce, or Laporta. I would say it's really funny. Like, I don't want to start Kelce, but I actually think it's a good move this week. I mean, I think it really does add up. Like, without Pacheco, I really don't see as much balance. I really don't think that we're going to see, like, what they were doing with Pacheco before he went down in week 2 was awesome. I mean, he had like 19 carries in that game. He was about to get 20 plus. And Carson Steele, on top of that, had 7. Like, and a lot of those were before Pacheco went down because Pacheco went down really late. So I think that Kelce legitimately could be a good rebound option this week. I really do think so. Ford, my problem with Ford is that volume. Now, Pierre Strong, the Browns' backup running back, the primary backup running back, he went down with an injury. So there was a reason Deonta Foreman was involved. I don't know why he was that involved. I mean, he overtook the carries from Jerome Ford. So it just kind of reminds me of last year with the Browns. And the reason I didn't like Ford that much coming into the year is because I didn't think things were going to change very much. So I think that Ford is in a split backfield. While a good player, and while he will be efficient, it is a split backfield. I like the matchup, though, against the Giants. Laporta, the ceiling is still there, and I think the ceiling is probably just as high, if not higher, than Travis Kelce. I mean, I'm assuming you're going to have to play one of these guys at the tight end position. So, like, I don't know how you could bench both of those guys. So I would personally go with somebody like I would personally, play Laporta at the tight end and then flex Jerome Ford and Kelce. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense that you would only be able to play one of those tight ends. You have 3 tight ends on your roster. So yeah, I would personally, if I had to choose only 2 of them, I would probably go with Kelce and Ford this week. That's probably what I would do. And again, appreciate the super chat. You guys can see how full it is. The way to jump the line and get your question answered immediately is through a super chat. Because we're going at like from the very top down to the bottom. D'Ambrosio Lawn Care, what's going on? Lockett, Quinton, or Tyler Johnson? This week, I think that Tyler Johnson is the play. I think Tyler Johnson's the play. Lockett worries me, obviously, because of Jackson Smith-Njigba's breakout week. Like, I want to believe desperately that that's a consistent thing we're about to see is more Jackson Smith-Njigba. I'm not there yet, but, like, I mean, he had, 3 targets last week? Like, he was not involved. So, there was a clear mandate that Jackson Smith-Njigba get the ball a lot. Like, that was a deliberate effort to get him the ball. I think they targeted him 18 times. That's crazy. I mean, so Lockett, I don't think has the upside if Jackson Smith-Njigba maintains that involvement. Tyler Johnson, I just look at it, it's an open field. I mean, it literally is an open field. I genuinely don't think that there's any wide receiver who has the leg up. I don't. This is not a situation where I'm not coming into it and saying Demarcus Robinson's got the leg up because he was technically a starter. It's like, what has that amounted to in 2 weeks? He's had opportunities, and it's really been nothing there. So I don't think that any of them have a leg up. It's an open field to me. So I would go with Tyler Johnson because I think anybody just has as good of a chance as anyone. Johnston I might pick if he wasn't playing the Steelers. He's playing the Steelers, though, so I'm going to hang back on Johnston. It's so funny how the tides have turned with Quentin Johnston for me because I used to be the biggest, people didn't get why I didn't like Quentin Johnston so much last year. I turned out to be right on that one, and now this year I'm kind of like, yeah, I kind of like him right now, and everyone's like, you're crazy. So it's really funny how we're in that place right now with Quentin Johnston. That's what we're at. Travi J, what's going on? Traded Brian Robinson and Trey McBride for DK Metcalf and Travis Kelce. Thoughts? W or L? To be honest with you, I would have stuck with it. I would have stuck with Brian Robinson and Trey McBride. Because number one, I think that McBride is the better option between him and Kelce. I think that McBride is going to be consistently having more upside on a week-to-week basis than Travis Kelce. Kelce, I'm not denying that he's going to get some big plays. There will be games where he has, I could see 17 to 25 point games. I think they're going to be few and far between, though. And a lot of it is going to be what we've seen up to this point. Now, again, I can understand it. I just made the argument for it myself, where I think that honestly, McBride is just in better spot right now because with Kelce, like I said, I just made the argument that I think Kelce can and will get more opportunities without Isiah Pacheco. I think they're about to be less stable offensively, so I do think that there's legitimate opportunity there. And I also, DK is great, obviously. I'm not convinced DK is going to be... I'm not convinced that DK all of a sudden turned over a new leaf. That's just not where we're at with DK. So I think that personally with somebody like Brian Robinson Jr., I think that he's going to be really good. I've been beating the drum on Brian Robinson Jr. for all the offseason. I think Brian Robinson Jr. is going to turn out to be close to a top 12 back this year. This isn't a fluke. This guy is working in Cliff Kingsbury's system, and he's really efficient because he has Jane Daniels at quarterback, taking pressure off of him in the box. So I think really the tight end is the difference here, and I would prefer McBride, so I personally, myself, would have stuck with that. Run CMC, just wanted to address this. Drop a like and thank you. Well, I appreciate you being in here. How can I join Patreon or YouTube monthly subscription? So you can join the Patreon. There is a link in the description. There is a link to the Patreon in the description right there. So if you wanted to join the Patreon, you can go ahead and use that link. And also with the YouTube subscription, I don't have one set up yet. Now, at some point, we probably will do that. I kind of just want to get a feel for who would be interested in getting like exclusive live streams for YouTube members and exclusive chats for YouTube members. Like, honestly, just curious who would be interested in it. So let me know if you would have interest in the YouTube monthly subscription. Because I would definitely start one, if we had a lot of people who would be interested at some point. But right now, you can join the Patreon using that link in the description. Appreciate you asking. And for anybody else who wants to join as well. Russ Deasy, what's going on? Should I trade Mike Evans for James Conner? It's close, man. Like they're really in the same tier for me, honestly. Because I'm not lower on Mike Evans after a bad week. Like, that's what Mike Evans is, right? Like, Mike Evans will have good games, and he will have games where he doesn't really do much. And that's okay. I don't take this Chris Godwin, this Chris Godwin situation, I don't take it as, like, Mike Evans is going to suffer now. Like, they both put up great points in week 1, right? Now, again, it was Washington, so that is definitely worth pointing out. But, I think that Mike Evans is going to be just fine. Connor's great. Connor is in a great situation right now. So really, in this scenario, I would default to what your roster looks like. If you're good at running back and you need another wide receiver, I would take Mike Evans. Like if you have, if you've got Saquon and you've got Brian Robinson and James Conner and you want to get a better wide receiver, yeah, I would take Mike Evans. But if you're lower on running backs and you're just trying to stack on receivers, I would say just hang on to Conner, personally myself. Myra Williams, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Traded Monty and Brian Thomas Jr. for Malik Neighbors and Travis. I'm assuming you're saying Travis Etienne. I get the Malik Neighbors trade for sure. I was just talking about it earlier. What I fear is that people would trade too high for Malik Neighbors this week. That's my fear a little bit. And, like, you didn't give up anybody egregious, right? Like, Brian Thomas Jr., I think, is a good guy to give up. I think he's overvalued as is right now. So, I'm totally fine with that. Montgomery versus Travis Etienne, which is, again, what I'm assuming you're talking about, that's what scares me. Travis Etienne is a legitimate worry for me personally because Travis Etienne is not on an offense. Like, this offense is not the same. It's not explosive, and he's not as explosive. Like, even with Tank Bigsby went down relatively early in that game, didn't do anything, and Travis Etienne still couldn't get it going. Like, this guy is averaging like 12.5 carries per game, and he's got like less than 4 yards of carry still. It looks bad. The only thing that's saving his weeks right now is his receiving upside to a point and his touchdowns that he's getting. That's the only thing that is saving his weeks. Monty is a really stable guy who is going to continue to get you good fantasy upside, good fantasy production for sure. I don't hate the trade, right? Like, I think that there's a lot of scenarios where I would have made the trade. Obviously, I like Malik Neighbors a lot, and Brian Thomas Jr., I think, is overvalued. The one thing I'm concerned with on this one is it's important for people to know that with Malik Neighbors, he is in a situation where he has Daniel Jones at quarterback. That doesn't change. The fact that they played the Commanders last week was a gift because that defense is atrocious against any quarterback. So, that's the only thing I would say, but I would overall, like, the upside in this one is going to be better. So I think that Malik Neighbors was the better pick, but I will say, like, Travis Etienne I am slightly worried about. But if you're great at running back and just need an upside play at wide receiver, awesome. You're in great shape now because Neighbors will be an upside play. That guy will bust sometimes. I think he will bust. But given that he's the wide receiver one by far, he's elite. Like, honestly, he's really good. already. And the fact that, this offense is just run by Daniel Jones, like I do think he will have up and down weeks. But I would say Malik Neighbors, obviously, great guy. Like, great guy to get in fantasy right now. So, yeah, I would say that's a move that, depending on the team form, like what my team looked like, I probably would have made as well. Appreciate the super chat, Myra. Good to see you in here. Make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you haven't already, make sure to do that. Let's see what else we've got going on here. Arlen, Younghoe Koo, Bates, or Carlson this week. Full PPR. Kicker rankings out tomorrow. I will let you watch that video and make that determination yourself. Let's see. Brian Sykes, what's going on? Non-PPR, need 2 of the following. London, JSN, Najee, Moss, Dobbins. Suggestions? You've got Dobbins, who's a locked and loaded guy. Especially in a non-PPR. Like, Dobbins is locked and loaded, needs to go in your lineup. Non-PPR kind of almost eliminates Jackson Smith-Njigba for me. Because if you look at Jackson Smith-Njigba, like, he's not getting... Like, he's doing a lot of what he did last year. Like, a lot of it's short distance. Some of it is, like, mid-tier. Like, he's going over the middle of the field and getting these yardage. But a lot of it definitely is, shorter distance stuff. So, like, unless he has, like, 100 yards, it's not great in fantasy football. And it's just more unlikely that he does particularly do it. I just can't get on board with Najee, really. Like, Najee 1 week, he'll have touchdowns, especially if he keeps handling the goal line work, which he will. So he will provide fantasy upside at some point. I would go with Moss. In this matchup versus the Commanders, I think it's a great matchup, obviously. And with Dobbins, there's no way Dobbins is not in that group for sure. So Dobbins and Moss are probably my suggestions in a PPR or a non-PPR league because, the problem with Jackson Smith-Njigba lined out, the problem with London is that without that touchdown last week, disappointing week for many people again. So it was on his way to fully disappoint, and especially in a non-PPR format where you don't get the the receptions. Hasn't proven to be a big play yet. So, yeah, I would say Moss and Dobbins here. J.K. Dobbins or Aaron Jones? J.K. Dobbins without question. J.K. Dobbins, people need to realize, this is a legit fantasy player. That is a legit fantasy player. This is a top 10 running back. That's what he is. Chargers, that's just, you do not sit J.K. Dobbins right now. The guy's on fire, and he's with the Chargers, which I've explained ad nauseum at this point, why it's good to have a Chargers running back in fantasy football. So, yeah, J.K. Dobbins over Aaron Jones for sure. Tistark, Nico and James Conner, or Rice and JT? They're both great. They're both great sides of the coin. You can't really go wrong with either of them. It's a splitting hairs argument here we're about to have. Because if I'm splitting hairs here, I probably prefer Nico and Conner. Because I don't think that honestly, there may not be a gap at all. And if there is a gap, I might favor James Conner over Jonathan Taylor. Like I said, my issue with Jonathan Taylor is exclusively workload related. Do they get it fixed? I don't know. Honestly, I really don't. I think back to when Shane Steichen, the head coach in Indianapolis, I think back to when he was the offensive coordinator in Philly with Jalen Hurts that year he broke out, and that was a pass-first team. That running back that year was Miles Sanders, and, a lot of his work he actually did do through the receptions. So, I think that personally, it's hard to say that Jonathan Taylor eventually gets like 18 carries a game, which is exactly what Connor's getting right now. Nico is a little bit better, in my opinion, than Rashee Rice, and it's not really my opinion. He has been better, but long-term, I think it's better as well. I mean, this dude, like, I was beating the drum on him all offseason too. Like, I don't understand what people's issue was with Nico in the offseason. Guy's been elite. He's the number 2 wide receiver in fantasy right now, behind Chris Godwin. Like, he's been elite. So, yeah, if we're splitting hairs here, I would go ahead and play with the Nico side. The Nico and James Conner side. King Twal, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Hey, brother, you think Mostert is worth holding? Seems like a wasted spot on my bench right now with more useful waiver pickups. Appreciate you. Well, I appreciate you too. Appreciate you stopping by. You know, I think that, like, I see where you're coming from. I think that Mostert is a problem, especially without Tua. I think this offense is going to run through Achane and Tyreek Hill. Those are the only 2 guys that I want on this offense. So let's walk through logically what Mostert's upside is if he plays. Raheem Mostert, the threat of the pass is not really going to be there. And he's also not getting receptions because that's Achane. That's what Achane does. That's his work. So essentially what Mostert's going to have to get is big plays because they're not going to get at the goal line that much. So he's in a tough spot. Now, what I will say, let's get a practice update. I don't know if he practiced today, what his status is. Let's get an update. Logs limited practice today. So he's limited. He should be coming back, if not this week, then next week. He's going to have value. Like, he's going to have trade value. And I always say this. When you're thinking about whether or not to drop someone, a good litmus test for yourself is to ask yourself, will this player get picked up off the waiver wire as soon as I drop them? And would I pick them up if somebody else dropped them? If your answer is yes or probably, then that player has trade value. So for me personally, like, I would be trying to trade Mostert before I sold him or before I dropped him because I know he does have upside and value in fantasy football. Not a ton of upside. That's the wrong word. I'm sorry. He has value in fantasy football. So, yeah, that's where I stand. Is before I drop him, I personally would be trying to trade him first. Especially, like, if you're – not everybody's in this type of league, so, like, it's not a blanket statement I'm about to make. But if you're in Sleeper – and I think Yahoo does this as well. If you can trade a player for Fab, and if you have a Fab-based waiver system, for those of you who don't know, that's free agency annual budget. Basically, that's how you get waiver wire players. You bid on players using the money. It's not real money, it's funny money. I would personally try to sell Mostert for like $15 to $20 Fab. Like if I had that luxury of doing that, like. And because, for example, like if you want to get another player off the waiver wire, then you could use the $15 Fab that you got in the trade for Mostert to go pick somebody else up. So if you have that luxury, I would trade Mostert for Fab right now because I think the writing's kind of on the wall for most people. Like, people get that this is not a good situation with Mostert. So he's not going to have too much upside on the trade market, but he does have value, and that's why I would prefer to try to get him off through trade rather than just cutting him right now. Appreciate the super chat. Kyle, you were up next. What's going on? Start Stevenson or Waddle? I'd go Stevenson this week, yeah. Stevenson against the Jets. Listen, there's a couple different factors here. Ramondre Stevenson has been really good. I mean, like I said on the running back rankings video today, I had him ranked lower than people wanted to see him, and I get it. Like, I get it. I'm just lower on Ramondre, and I have been lower on him since the beginning of the offseason. Like, literally dating back to, like, March, I've been low on Ramondre. So I get where people are coming from when they say, you're too low, man. Like, totally get it. the matchup this week and what he's done, like what he's done has been really good, first of all. Second of all, the matchup this week is really good. Like the matchup is really solid. So I think that I look at this and I'm like, you know, Stevenson is taking on a defense that has gotten carved up on the ground the last 2 weeks. Jordan Mason carved him up. Tony Pollard just carved him up. So I think for me, Stevenson's a good start. Waddle is, like I said, Waddle in my wide receiver rankings was down at the bottom. I don't trust Waddle. I think Waddle, of all players in Miami, I think he suffers the most without Tua. That's what I think. So I would start Stevenson this week. And again, appreciate the super chat. Roger Maher, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Worthy or Brian Thomas for Jahmyr White? Have Bijan, Monty, Dowdle, Jalen Wright. Wide receivers are Rice, Mike Evans, Terry, and Olave. Man, I don't see the upside of trading for Jahmyr White at all. Especially with your running back room. Like, you've got two legit starting running backs with Bijan and Monty. Dowdle is as good of a backup, I think, as Jahmyr White. Now, I think what we might see, the only thing I'll say is Jahmyr White may have a good week this week because he's playing the Panthers. That very well may happen. But I think after that, kind of goes back to blah. Like, not just blah, garbage. I mean, vomit. That's what we're getting from Jahmyr White because the promise with him was during the offseason, he's going to get the workload. He's not even doing that. So it's not pretty. It's not pretty, man. It's not a pretty situation. Yeah, I personally myself wouldn't trade either of these guys for Jahmyr White. Because the reality is, like, Worthy, like I said earlier, Worthy is a low-key buy for me, and if I have him, keep. Because Worthy is going to see more work without Pacheco. Because, again, if you remember in week 1 and even week 2, Worthy's going to get carries. Like, Worthy's going to get jet sweep opportunities. They're going to get him the ball. It's sort of like Jane Reed, right? Like, he's going to get work. So without Pacheco, like, I think Worthy is low-key a buy low. Somebody I considered putting him in on the buy low video, I think that's an honorable mention. Buy low on Worthy this week. I would not sell him for Jahmyr White. Brian Thomas Jr. is closer, but I still think he has more value on the trade market than Jahmyr White. I think if you're looking for a running back, like if you have one of these two guys, let's just stick with Brian Thomas because that's the guy I would rather sell more. If you're looking at Brian Thomas and what his trade value could be, try to get somebody like a Zach Moss for him. Zach Moss is a better player than Jahmyr White. Try to get someone like I would take Travis Etienne over Brian Robinson or Brian Thomas. Aaron Jones maybe, an injured Kenneth Walker I would take. I mean, there's a lot of better options that you could get for Brian Thomas, I think, than you could for, a guy like Jahmyr White. Like, that's. I think if you're trying to sell Brian Thomas, you target one of those running backs rather than Jahmyr White. Appreciate the super chat. Jack Henkel, what's going on? Do I trade Waddle and Brian Thomas for Devonta Smith? I'm 0-2, 12-team PPR. Team is Burrow, Waddle, A.J. Brown, Pickens, Higgins, Cook, Etienne, and Brian Thomas. Yes, I would do this. For sure. I mean, your team is struggling right now. And you've obviously got A.J. Brown out. You've got Higgins out. Waddle is about to take a downturn. Cook is your steady Eddie right here, which is good. But Devonta Smith without A.J. Brown is going to be really good in fantasy. That's a guy who helps your team immediately when I don't think either Brian Thomas or Waddle really helps you get to a win this week. Like, Thomas isn't irrelevant. He's not waiver wire worthy. And, of course, Waddle isn't. But, again, I've made my issues with both those guys clear. They're both going to have issues here. Brian Thomas with the fact that he's doesn't seem to me through 2 weeks like he's progressing as a route runner. and also doesn't seem to be in an offense that looks any good. So Waddle, the problem, of course, I've been through is Tua. I think he's the player that suffers the most from Tua's absence. So I think Devonta Smith is going to help you get a win faster than Waddle and Brian Thomas Jr. can. So that's, I think that you're right. You're on the right track here with your train of thought. Like, getting it right is the first step, is like having the right train of thought. I think you have the right train of thought on this one. So yeah, I would go with Devonta Smith and trade both those guys in a heartbeat for Devonta Smith. Appreciate the super chat. Brian Gale, what's going on? Who would you sit between Mike Evans, Olave, Derrick Henry, and Dobbins this week? Appreciate the help. Well, I appreciate the super chat and appreciate you being here. Mike Evans, Olave, Derrick Henry, and Dobbins. I'm not sitting Dobbins. Not a chance. Not sitting Evans. It's between Olave and Henry. Probably would sit Olave in this matchup. The Eagles, man, that's tough actually, because the Eagles' defense can be beaten for sure. It's tough, man. I think Henry is also in a good matchup too. Like, I think Henry's in a really good spot this week. It's tough. They're a toss-up for me. They're both relatively close. I'm leaning towards Henry. I'm leaning towards Henry this week. I think the Cowboys, the reality with the Ravens, and believe me, I'm in no mood to defend the Ravens' loss against the Raiders, but I'm going to extend an olive branch to my division rival as a Steelers fan, the Ravens, because fantasy football analysis comes first. And the reality with Lamar, that I don't know if y'all have seen this. There's a stat that Lamar Jackson, he's lost like one game against the NFC in his entire career. That's like Madden numbers. Like, that's like outrageous. Like, how do you do that at the NFL level? So yeah, I think personally, they're gonna win this game. I believe the Ravens are gonna win this game because Lamar doesn't lose against the NFC. So I would go with Henry here because I think he's gonna have a lot of goal line opportunities. That's what I would do personally. I'm leaning Henry. You can play Olave just fine. Like, I think Olave is a good play this week. None of them are bad plays this week for me because Olave's got the Eagles matchup, and I think the Eagles defense looks worse than I thought they would, and it's disappointing. Yeah, I would go ahead and play Henry. I would play Henry, Mike Evans, and J.K. Dobbins. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate the super chat. Let's see what else. We're back at the top here. AJK, I traded Ferguson and Waddle for Kelce and Amari Cooper. Who won this trade? Probably Kelce. I would probably pick Kelce here because, like I said, I think Kelce will see more involvement. I think we're about to see a better version of Travis Kelce. I think that's what we're going to see. Because Travis Kelce doesn't have the competition anymore of running. Like, I mean, it's not competition, I guess, but like, he doesn't have, there's not going to be balance, I don't think, in this offense. I don't think there's going to be balance in this offense. So, I think that that Kelce is a good play this week. And I think that for the long term, like, since Pacheco's out for a long time, like, with Ferguson, what's Ferguson's status? Let's actually check on that one too. Apparently they left the door open for him to play last week. He obviously didn't. Let's see he was limited today. So good sign for Jake Ferguson owners. I do think Jake Ferguson is a decent play when he plays. But I think that Kelce is going to be good in the next several weeks, particularly, I think. And I also think that Cooper is honestly, like, not just as good as Waddle because, like, he hasn't been able to do as much. But I think, honestly, what we'll see here in the next several weeks is that Cooper, based on targets, he should be working. Now, obviously, Deshaun Watson stinks. Like, that's a very nice way to put it for me personally. That guy sucks. So, with Waddle, like, his problem is he's not the wide receiver one like Amari is. So, what happens when you take away Tua and you play Skylar Thompson or Tyler Huntley in the future? There's not going to be as many plays for you. You're going to have to hit on a big play. Amari, I actually sort of prefer long-term versus Jaylen Waddle, at least for the next 4 weeks. That's what I would prefer. So, yeah, I would take the Amari and the Kelce side. Joe Gonzalez, would you trade Xavier Worthy for Deontay Johnson with Dalton taking over? There's not a chance. There's not a single chance I would do that. Not a single chance at all that I would do that. I think that that Worthy, like I've been saying, I think Worthy has legitimate buy low potential. Like, I think Worthy is the best honorable mention as a buy low this week that I could have made. And Deontay Johnson, dude, he has been, like, I mean, it's not even all his fault. Like, honestly, like, Deontay Johnson is just in the worst possible scenario. Here's the reality, though, guys. Like, I was actually thinking about this earlier today. When you think about the Panthers' last several quarterbacks, they all have a very similar pattern. Baker Mayfield, several years ago. Does anybody remember when he was a Panther for like half the season? He was atrocious. He got benched. He was so bad. He obviously is playing really good football right now. By the way, quarterback one right now in fantasy football, just in case you didn't know. So, he's obviously turned out much better in Tampa. Look at Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold was, I think, the guy who took over for Baker that same year. Atrocious in football. Last year was a backup for the 49ers. This year, now he's thriving so far with the Vikings. This isn't just a Bryce Young problem. It's not. And I don't think Bryce Young was worthy of number one. And it's easy to say now, obviously, right? Hindsight's 20/20. But this dude is not, like, this dude on the field, like, there's several problems. Not only is he small, he's also not mobile. Like, this guy is not, the best thing that he could possibly be is if he was like Kyler Murray. Because Kyler is just as short, but Kyler's more big. He's bigger than Bryce Young. Can take more punishment. He's also freaking fast. And he's got a cannon. And he's really accurate. Bryce is none of the above. None of the above. So Bryce is not good. And I think that Panthers fans would second that. I think Panthers fans, honestly, I think they've kind of seen it all. They've seen what they need to see. Now, the problem with Deontay, this is not just a Bryce Young issue. That team is broken. They're finished. I mean, that team is just an utter disaster. It reminds me of like what the Browns used to be like for like most of the 90s and like the 2000s and like most of the 2010s. Like they're an utter disaster. So yeah, I think Xavier Worthy, like his arrow for me is pointing up. Deontay's is like, if anything, at best, like it was going down, now it's kind of stabilizing. That's what I kind of see. Run CMC, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat, my man. Good to see you in here. 10 PPR, Anthony Richardson. Running backs are Gibbs, Kiren, Achane, Mason, Braylon. Wide receivers are A.J. Brown, DJ Moore, J-Mo, Worthy, Kincaid. Trades, stash, pick 2, 2, and 1. So by pick 2, 2, and 1, I'm assuming you're saying to start them this week. So we'll do that first. Achane and Gibbs are my starts. I'm sorry, Jordan Mason and Achane are my starts. For sure. They're great options. I mean, Achane is the running back, the entire offense is going to run through Devon Achane without question. So Achane is definitely that dude for sure. And Mason, obviously, just based on workload, is great. It's going to be hard for me to bench Gibbs in this situation. A.J. Brown obviously can't play him. DJ Moore is really scary right now. DJ Moore is an issue for sure. I have little confidence in DJ Moore that I used to have. DJ Moore's got problems, man. It's not even him. Like it's obviously Caleb Williams. Anybody who's watched Caleb so far this year, it's been an embarrassment. It's not even. Honestly, I'm not going to say it was an embarrassment. I gained a lot of respect for Caleb Williams. He took a freaking beating. He was under siege against the Texans, and that dude just kept getting up. Like, it reminded me of watching Ben Roethlisberger back in the days where he had a bad offensive line and he was getting crushed play by play by the Ravens, and he'd still just get back up. And the difference between Ben and Caleb is Ben used to get back up and, like, just continue to nail you over the middle and deep. Caleb's not doing that yet, but I think he can at some point. DJ Moore is there's not chemistry there right now, though. That's a fact. That offense is not building a lot of chemistry right now between those two guys specifically. That being said, like, out of your options right here, you know, he kind of is, you know, your best wide receiver option potentially. Jameson needs to be in your lineup for sure. Jameson is absolutely a guy that needs to be in your lineup. I would say that I would go with DJ Moore, Jameson at the wide receiver position, and I would go with Kiren Achane at the running backs, and I would flex Gibbs this week. That's what I would do. You know, for me, in this situation, I think that with a guy like Kiren is the guy I'm trying to sell high. Honestly, for me, like, what I would do personally is I would try to package together Kiren and DJ Moore and see if you can get, like, a pretty good upgrade. Like, if you could get, you're stronger at running back than you are wide receiver, so I would try to upgrade a wide receiver here with this trade. So for me, if I could package together Kiren and DJ Moore, what I would try to get out of this is somebody like a receiver like a Mike Evans is what I would try to get. I would try to get a Mike Evans. I would try to get, let's look. Mike Evans is the first guy that comes to mind coming off a bad week. Try to get Jahmyr. As unlikely as it is, I would try to get Jahmyr first before I try to get Mike Evans. I would try to get Rashee Rice. I would try to get Tyreek maybe if anyone would sell high. Maybe Marvin. And I would probably target a running back in the range of, like, you know, like Zach Moss. That's probably what I would do is, like, just get a guy who can provide you good depth still. Maybe Brian Robinson Jr. I'm still sort of, like, finding that not everybody values Brian Robinson Jr. the same way I do. I think he's extremely valuable. So I think that that's what I would do personally is I would try to package together Kiren and DJ Moore and try to get a massive upgraded wide receiver and get a good depth piece at running back. Because you've got great options here. Like, your running backs here are elite. Honestly, you may not even be worse off just going for, like, a major wide receiver upgrade and just putting all your chips in on that. Like, going for Kiren and DJ Moore to upgrade to, like, you know, like Justin Jefferson or something like that. That's the move that I would think about making in your situation. Because I do want to trade Kiren for sure. And if I could package him together with DJ Moore, that's probably best case. Appreciate the super chat, though. Let's see. Chris, should I trade Kelce for Pickens? Probably not, because you probably don't have much tight end depth behind him. Like, imagining, like, the problem with trading, the trade value of quarterbacks and tight ends is they're not the same as running backs and wide receivers, right? Because you have more wide receivers on your roster than just like 2 at max. And sometimes people go with 1 quarterback on their roster. Like, I've done it plenty of times myself. Especially if I get a top-tier quarterback or a top-tier wide receiver. So the problem with trading Kelce is you probably don't have anybody that's legit going to be able to take over. And, like, Pickens is not moving the needle enough for me to be able to make that move confidently. If we were talking about Kelce and Rachaad Rice, no brainer, I would take Rachaad Rice for sure. I would figure out tight end. But with Pickens, like, you're banking sometimes on getting, like, sometimes you're banking on him getting 20 points, which he hasn't done this year, by the way. And if he doesn't do that, sometimes you're only going to get like 5 or 6 points, which is like what you're getting from Kelce for now. But again, the point is not to say that they're scoring similar in fantasy. The point is to say that Kelce is at a onesie position. You probably don't have much depth behind him. So yeah, that's my move personally, is I would personally make that type of a deal myself. We're going to take 2 more questions, then we're going to sign off for the night, guys. So make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And check out that Aaron Rodgers line. Take advantage of it on Underdog today. Link is in the description. Half a yard is his line on Underdog, so free pick. Take advantage of it using code FFN. Not only is it a money win, but it's also a good way to support the channel. And again, let me know, guys. I got a question earlier. If you guys wanted to, if I had a YouTube subscription, I don't have one yet. But if you guys wanted to get like membership only chats and membership only live streams, if you'd be interested in doing that, let me know. We can get something like that going. Just let me know. Joey Hewley, what's going on? I traded Aaron Jones and Waddle for CMC and Jahmyr White. Do you think that's good? I mean, maybe. I guess, like, yeah, I probably would take that, yeah. I probably would take that because CMC obviously provides the most upside out of the bunch. Waddle, if Tua wasn't down, it's a different story, but Tua being down lowers Waddle's upside. There's just no question about it. So, yeah, I would have made this move. Jacob, are you starting more Jamo or Pollard as flex? I would go with Pollard this week. Jameson's probably my number 2. It sounds really weird to say, but because I was really big on DJ Moore to start the year, and he's probably the last guy I would flex. DJ Moore is a problem, man. It's not DJ Moore's fault either. It's Caleb. Caleb and him just aren't meshing well, and Caleb is just not looking good altogether. Pollard, I think, is a really good play this week against the Packers. Definitely big on Pollard this week, so I would play Pollard. Flair, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. Do I trade Evans 1-to-1 for Garrett Wilson? Tough. I probably wouldn't do that. I think you can get Wilson for lower, personally. I think you can. If not this week, then possibly next week. You can get lower for Wilson. And I do think that, like, you know, Evans is still going to be really good. And he has, to this point, a higher ceiling than we've ever seen from Garrett Wilson. So I would stick with Evans personally. I think you get Garrett Wilson for cheaper, to be honest with you. Appreciate the super chat. And that's going to do it for the night, guys. So appreciate y'all being in here. Make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel on your way out. Tomorrow's video is quarterback rankings and kicker rankings. So stay tuned for that. Check out the Underdog line. Sign up for Underdog using code FFN. And I'll see you guys on tomorrow's videos. Everyone have a good rest of the night.